Can't believe it. Yeah. You remember that?
Guy that took all the pictures and wasn't in any of them.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
That's not important. We did it.
Yeah.
Did
That's
it.
right. That's Springfield.
0 to 300 to 0 inside 5 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's yeah. That's that. Remember in '70?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
you
remember.
if you would have uncorked that in '70.
Are you kidding? We're too old to remember that.
Oh, are you?
You're the only one that can remember.
Yeah, right.
Where did John and I get together? It happened because Denis brought the Streamliners to the flats during Speed Week in August of 1970.
Right.
He was going to ride it. That didn't work out. They had a Sportster in there that didn't work out. But Malcolm Woods,
Right.
the West Coast Harley Davidson sales manager, just happened to be here and saw what he thought, if we put this guy and this guy and this motor and this together, made a call to John Davidson and Charlie Thompson, and OB got turned loose and we got calls.
Yep.
I got a call at work asking about going to the flats, and I said, oh, terrific, you're really planning ahead. He says, no, we're not, next week. So I went into my boss and said, I need two weeks off without pay. He says, it's your lucky day. He says, my budget could look a little better if I took you off for 2 weeks. Go have fun, bring us a record. So off we went. George Smith and I took 2 motorcycles that Harley had brought with. One was a Baja and one was a Sprint.
Right.
And I said, come on, George, let's go for a dirt bike ride. Well, of course, he turned his end over end, did his thumb, and so we took the bikes back in and a motor mount was broken. Clyde Denzer thought, I should fix this. So while he's doing the welding, there's a fire, and Clyde figures, well, even if the garage burns down, we shouldn't lose the El Camino, the trailer, and the Streamliner.
Right.
So he drives the thing out and runs over the canopy. John goes out in the desert, makes a mold, puts it in there, tippity tappity tappity. We don't see him for a couple, 3 hours. He comes back with this piece of magic, and we all go, wow, how'd you do that? I just work with it a little out in the desert. For real.
Yeah.
That piece still fit and went 265, it went 255, 265.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, it's still on that motorcycle.
Yeah.
In its repaired case.
Yeah.
So
Then
we had a collection of people that had all kind of capabilities. You know, it was interesting to see Rayburn, who had won Daytona twice, the 200. Very, very good. He would be every bit of Chris Carr today. And there's OB, the old guy, the boss, you know.
Very good.
Swinging the hammer, telling you how it's all going to work out. And Clyde Denzer, John Poland, and then George Smith. And were you involved when they went over to the Air Force Base and started picking up pieces of metal?
No, I think I was still at the garage.
Okay. The Streamliner's sitting there, and George Smith walks over to it, and he grabs the chain, and he squeezes the chain, and he can make the back wheel rotate. Not rotate, bend out of position. There's something about the rear section that isn't strong enough. So George, and maybe it was Clyde, went over to the Wendover base where they have some abandoned aircraft with hacksaws in hand, took out pieces of metal, brought them back, cut them on the floor, ground them as best we could, and braced that whole thing so it stiffened it, because Rayburn said every time he'd really get into the thing, he'd want to go the wrong direction. And George was smart enough to see that. You know, I would never have, when he did it, I thought, bing, of course. But would I have walked over and squeezed that chain? I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, then we had the problem with the front end. It wasn't stiff enough.
Right.
And we went out and I took the valve springs out of an old Dodge car and took them apart, and we mounted them in the front suspension to help that.
Right.
And that cured that problem.
Did you help make that indicator up front that said 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
People looked at it and thought it was a gear shift indicator, but it was a position, so Rayburn could see this. You know, Rayburn, as good a rider as he was, that liner was really something different. And you know, he comes back and he said, well, it steers funny, the nose is this and that. And, well, you're finding these things out because that's the first time it's really had muscle and it's really gone distance with lots of this.
Right.
And all of a sudden, all the things that look good at home don't look so good anymore. And so we're making and bending and cutting and fussing. And I thought I was back in Motorcycle Engineering 101. You know, I came out of there learning all kinds of things. And remember, we're starting a thing with the rollers at the flats.
Right.
And we were always having a clutch problem. And Rayburn said, let the rollers keep moving so that instead of one set of plates sitting and one set of plates going like this,
Right.
you got both sets of plates moving, and even though the speed differential is there, it's not the same as if one set is stopped.
Right.
And again, I thought, of course, I knew that. So, amazing stuff.
Yep. All of the things
Yeah.
that happened there. Back until last year, and Denis was bugging me, and so I think it was 37 years, and I had been drag racing and building motorcycles and just doing other things. Just never had the time to come back. But we were running top fuel cars after, well, I was doing it when we went to Bonneville, and so I just kind of kept it the motorcycle and the drag racing.
I first came to Bonneville in '64 with Jim Lineweber, and then I came back in '67 to race and raced a number of years. Something about Bonneville beat the drags for me. I went to the drags 5 years, big time, with bikes, but I really liked the Bonneville thing. And then in '67 when I came, I had the very first S&S carburetor that ever existed.
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to set 4 records with that. And I didn't realize at the time that George Smith had actually been to Bonneville in '54. And so he actually had more interest than casual. And George and Marge wanted to continue to go to Bonneville, as did I. And boy, that was a collision that was just perfect. You know, you have a guy that has all sorts of expertise, and you have a guy who's young enough to ride it correctly and want to do it, put in the time and effort. And we just kept doing it. And then in '76, went one way at 203, and it was kind of slippery and wet down there. And we went to turn the bike around, and we were pull starting that, holding on to the side of a car, and I slipped, and I just about got run over by George. And I think we decided maybe we were trying too hard, doing too many things, enough is enough. You know, and you get to where you make a 198 mile an hour run, and someone says, "What's wrong?" And it's a lot easier to go from 160 to 170 than sometimes to go from 202 to 203. And so you end up in this declining kind of a effort versus results thing that you just have to work harder and harder and longer, and you end up tired.
Yep.
Yeah.
John, what kind of clutch you got?
Yeah. Over there, right next to it, it's got a big clutch he uses to chock his wheel. I don't know what it is. A bandit. A bandit. It's
Yeah?
a bandit. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't know I was next to my hero here. Okay, I'm out of here.
Where here you have at Bonneville, it's everybody tries to help everybody out, and it's just a friendly thing.
Yep. In all the Bonnevilles I've been to, I've been here 20 times, there's always a sense of you can step next door and ask, do you have one of these? Can I use this? Can I borrow that? Much better flow of information. For me, drag racing was a great way to test myself and the bike. I like the drag racing part of the reaction and the shifting and that whole kind of bam, 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 you know. But I really did it with a bunch of buddies. We were all guys that would go down to Santa Fe Park to watch a race and then do something we shouldn't on the way home their engines, you know. And the drags were, you know, just another formal way to do that. It wasn't cutthroat, and I think real drag racing today has got very sponsors and money and all sorts of things. And Bonneville appears to be one of the last places where you can go and really have a good time running something you put together that maybe you do well and maybe you don't, but you had a good time, and you can interact with a bunch of folks that are in similar shoes. There aren't many folks here that come here with that same killer commitment that you see in drag racing sometimes. But big time drag racing has turned into a high dollar kind of a thing, and so as soon as you, like we say in engineering, money changes physics.
The top fuel cars today, there's no comparison to when we were racing in the 60s and 70s. And I was with Jim Brzett, he's with Doug Herbert, his top fuel car now, but I was with Jimmy for years and grew up with them. And they were Brzett brothers. They were Bonneville racers with the cars, and they ran a Highboy Roadster and went 229 with that in the early 60s, and they had a belly tank that was, I think, 280 or something at the time, and that was pretty good, but there's nothing. And then when I met Warner, and George Smith was the greatest person there was. He was down to earth, wasn't this high tech, and to me, that's what drag racing's got to be. Denis brought me back. He called me one day and says, "Well, I have a bike. You know, do you want to run it at Bonneville?" And I said, "Sure." So we ended up with it, and come last year, and well, the way it wasn't good enough, and so we made all these changes in it, and I think we went overkill on it, and we've had some problems with it, but it's still fun. But just, and it was really neat last year to come back to the people that they're so nice. And this year's been very good, even though we haven't run good, but it was very good to see him after 38 years.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
It was a shock.
Yeah.
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 Last year, before I come to Bonneville, when we went to get, I had a bad hip, and I was going to have it replaced, so we went to the hospital, and they had to do a blood test, or check you to see if you're healthy enough to have the hip replacement. Anyway, they did whatever they do for the heart, and I flunked it, and they were going to put me in the hospital instantly and say to operate. Well, I told the doctor I got to go to Bonneville and race. So we went to Bonneville, and I got home on a Saturday and went in the hospital Monday for a quadruple bypass, and I come out fine. And then 2 months ago I had a hip replaced, and I'm in good shape, and the doctors really saved me, and these are my my doctors that
Cool.
took care of me, and the one doctor takes care of my wife. She has cancer, and but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, and it's kind of neat. They went out of their way to help me out. Well, when I got it from Denis, it had the TP motor in it, and then Tom at TP, he helped me out a lot and did some work on it, and then we went for the S&S carburetor, and it's got 3 power jets in it, and the D3 S&S. I built the body on it, and all of that. I do all the paint. And
What size is it?
it's a 124, and on the dyno it put out some ponies.
Really? What's the board stroke?
4 1/4, 4 1/2, I
Nice.
believe.
And how much lift does the cam have?
It's a 675 S&S cam in it.
Is the transmission special?
It's a Baker 6-speed overdrive, and that it's worked out real well, but we haven't been able to get it in 6 because we've had handling problems, but we'll get it. If not this year, next year.
You think the fairing was contributing to the handling problems?
Yes, I believe so. The fairing was, I think, too steep, and it collapsed the forks down to here. We had them marked, and it just took the fork angle off and had terrible head shake with it.
Yeah. Was it actually causing the steering to oscillate, or was it just causing the steering to be down and rake and trail aren't right?
It got the rake and trail off, and then it had terrible head shake in it.
Really?
Yeah.
Here's
How fast were you going, John?
Probably 150. This was the fairing on it, and it just had too much downforce on it, but that's what we had. But now we feel we just had too much angle.
Oh, you're right. You look at it, you see a big slope there. Like
Right.
most fairings are rounded.
Right,
They don't
and
do that.
it was
Yeah.
just, we tried. It's aluminum.
Nice. Did you make that?
I built all the body on it.
Did you go out in the desert and make a little mold?
We used telephone pole. Yeah, we don't have all the fancy brakes and rollers and all of that, so it's pretty much the old style, beaten with a hammer.